Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Happy Friday, kiddos. You're listening to The Right Time with Bomani Jones on ESPN Radio. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here. You want to get in touch with me? It ain't hard to do. 1-888-SAY-ESPN, 1-888-729-3776. Of course, ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance, and all guests on The Right Time appear via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Other options to get at me: the 1-800-Flowers Twitter feed, at ESPN Radio, at Clinton Yates. Y'all know the rules. Apparently, I have to go over them from time to time because people seem to forget what's actually happening out here. Say it with me, children. If you step into my mentions incorrectly, I will embarrass you in front of your friends and your family, and I will not apologize. I repeat, if you come incorrect in my mentions, I will embarrass you in front of your friends and your family, and I will not apologize. Let's get to some actual stuff. We got a lot of guests today. My man Don Van Natta, senior writer of ESPN The Magazine. He wrote a story with Seth Wickersham. You've probably read it by now. He's going to join us. Dan Graziano, ESPN NFL Insider, is going to be here as well. And we're going to catch up with Aaron Boone, ESPN MLB analyst. Of course, we got the World Series still happening, so there's a lot to get to. But right now, it's time for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, no contracts. Things are not looking good in Houston, y'all. After this meeting, the NFL owners dealing with the lot. Well, let's just say there was a quote that probably should not have come out of one Bob McNair's mouth. He's the owner of the Texans, in which he said, "We can't have the inmates running the prison," referring to the circumstance regarding player demonstrations surrounding the national anthem. All, of course, activities swung in motion by one Colin Kaepernick. Never mind the bastardization of the cause. Never mind what happened with President Trump. Never mind what happened with Jerry Jones threatening to bench people. We're going to set all that aside right now. We're going to deal with what's going on in-house with the Texans. When your owner comes out and calls you an inmate, A, and B, refers to his actual NFL operation as a prison, we got a problem, Shan. We have a major problem. And guess what? Turns out about 10 players walked out of the facility today because they had issues with this. And guess what else happened? Well, DeAndre Hopkins, as the resident best player on the team, said, "You know what? I ain't coming back. Not here for it. This is a move I pulled in high school a couple times. Oh, there's a fire drill? Y'all want us to go out there? I ain't coming back. I'm going to go ahead on and go home. You're going to make me leave class when I'm supposed to be learning. Maybe I'll just go ahead on and learn something elsewhere." But in the real, DeAndre Hopkins basically said, "I don't know. Not really sure if this is for me." There's a couple things here, though. First of all, love a good botched cliche. Nothing makes you look like less of an intelligent person than botching a cliche, and I say that as somebody that does it all the time. The technical phrase is, we can't have the inmates running the asylum, kiddos. But there's also an interesting point about this. And this is what I said today on Outside the Lines, if you missed that, which is that once McNair issued his apology and said that, "I don't want this to be taken literally," it's like, well, you know what the problem is with that is that the United States incarcerates more people than every other nation in the world. Like, this is not far from the sort of unfortunate reality we live in America, to just slip up and say something about prisons that's actually pretty real. Which, if you want to get to the crux of the actual matter that Colin Kaepernick was referring to, in terms of how the justice system operates, in terms of police brutality, and how that affects people of color, well, then that slip of the tongue is exactly why people are taking the knee, y'all. Understand that. 1-888-SAY-ESPN, 1-888-729-3776. Jeff in Michigan, what you got on a Friday?
Hey, how you doing? Like the show.
Thank you.
My only comment for today is basically the response from Bob McNair, and I understand the player situations, but with the whole thing in context, the last time I checked, there are also a full mixture of white men and black men in the prison system in this country. So on any given day, a white man and a black man could equally be offended. I mean, it shouldn't be just a racial issue, because that's the way it's being portrayed by the media right now. Because when he says that the inmates are running that he doesn't want the inmates to run the asylum, well, inmates in general mean anybody that's in the population of the prison, which includes white men and black men, correct?
Yep. Thanks for the phone call, Jeff. We're going to do a little something called education system. Listen, the reason why that point is of importance to people of color is because people of color are disproportionately put in America's prison system compared to those who are not. That's it. Disproportionately means proportion. There are laws that are made in this country that affect black folks more than they affect white folks, and that's why they're in prison at a higher rate. That's all. We're not going to get too far down the road on that. But most importantly, the reason why this really matters, Shannon, is because if this becomes a matter of example for other squads, where if your owner messes up, oh, you know what, we just not going to play. If this sets a precedent for teams that have a decent amount of backbone in terms of the guys who are leading their squad, relatively, I don't know, financially well-off guys, you got a relatively veteran-laden squad, and your owner pops off, you might just say, I ain't got time for no unity, as the NFL like to say. I'm gone.
Reading a quote from Dwayne Brown, the Pro Bowl left tackle of the Houston Texans, just ended his lockout, reported back to the team, I believe, this week. Dwayne Brown's quote earlier today was, "This is how you view us. You're an inmate. We can't let you get out of line. We can't let you speak for yourself."
Whoa. Whoa.
So now my question back to you, we saw the Texans walk out on practice, at least 10 players. Do you anticipate any players maybe not suiting up for the Texans this weekend?
That to me is a stretch, because then you get into game check territory, and when you start messing with people's money, it's difficult. Now, I don't know if anybody on that Texans team is willing to forego a game check. That being said, we've seen guys like Chris Long forego a season full of game checks for the sake of a good cause. What if a Texans player said, yeah, I'll sit out, put my game check towards charity, playboy? I mean, there are ways around this without looking entirely insubordinate. This is not the end of this, though. And I got to say, this immediate reaction must be striking a fair amount of fear in NFL owners across the league. It's one thing to take a knee before a national anthem. That doesn't do a whole lot outside of what we'll just call, Shannon, optics. But if dudes are just going to stop playing, that affects the competitive balance of the team. That affects everything in terms of the chain of command and the coaches. That affects, for lack of a better term, order, which is the most important thing on an NFL roster when it comes to keeping guys prepared to play. And that's what the issue is. If these issues from the owner are affecting their own ability to increase their bottom line because the team doesn't want to play, you have a problem. And dare I say, Houston, we have a problem.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Back to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here on a Friday. Guests on The Right Time up here via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. If you want to get in touch with us, do so on the 1-800-FLOWERS Twitter feed, at Clinton Yates, at ESPN Radio. Joining us right now, Don Van Natta, writer for ESPN The Magazine. Headline, gaffes, TV ratings, concerns, dominated as NFL and players forge anthem peace. You've been doing the car wash here today. We talked earlier on Outside the Lines, Don, about this story which looks into what happened after all of this protest stuff sort of fell out. Let's start at the beginning because we're talking journalist to journalist here. When did you two decide, and Seth, decide that this is a story you were going to tackle?
Well, we decided to go to New York for the owners' meetings last week, and we weren't sure we were going to write about it. We just started reporting, which we often do, and we kept hearing a lot of interesting things that were going on behind closed doors. So I think by the end of the day, Wednesday, when the meetings broke up at the Conrad Hotel in Lower Manhattan, we had heard enough interesting, intriguing, revealing things about those meetings that we knew we were going to do a story and tried to do it as quickly as possible, and produced it for today.
Let's go through the timeline here of the meetings for those who are walking into this cold. So there were 2 days over which these meetings happened. They were at 2 different locations from what I understand. Take me through, but before we get to the details, just sort of what was happening from a timeline standpoint.
Right. So the first day of the meetings, there was a very rare players-owners meeting that occurred at the Park Avenue headquarters of the NFL. There were 11 owners that were there. There were about a dozen players there and one former player, and then the 3 union executives, DeMaurice Smith, the head of the union, and Roger Goodell, Troy Vincent. What's interesting about that meeting is just how you're going to actually hold that meeting itself, where people are going to sit was something that was considered by the owners before that meeting occurred. It was 10 o'clock last Tuesday morning, and the owners thought usually when we meet with the players in the union, we're across the table from them. But this time, we're going to sit among them. And the symbolism of that was important. It was a way that the owners were going to try to express to the players, we're in this together. We're going to be partners in how we deal with this crisis confronting the NFL.
Next step was?
Next step is later that day, that afternoon, the owners that were in that meeting go down to the Conrad Hotel. That's in Lower Manhattan. That's where the 2-day NFL autumn meetings were being held. And they joined up with the other owners and Roger Goodell, and then they had basically a day and a half of owners meetings. And in our story, we take you behind the scenes, behind closed doors of what happened over those that day and a half at the Conrad.
Don Van Natta joins us here on The Right Time with Bomani Jones. Clinton Yates filling in here. He writes for ESPN, the magazine. There's a couple different details in this that I find to be extremely interesting. Okay, number one is, okay, you mentioned at one point, New York Jets linebacker Demario Davis stood up in front of the center of the room and told owners, I'm going to break it down for you guys. You guys aren't supporting us, and until you do, there's going to be an issue. Falcons owner, as you reported, Arthur Blank, later told Davis that he'd missed his calling as a great public speaker. Now, to the average fan, that sounds like sort of a nice thing to say, but there is a level of condescension there I found that was palpable. I was wondering what you thought about that, not in terms of how you reported it, but in terms of what you read, or not what you read, but you heard from everybody else.
Yeah, I actually think that Blank did not mean it in a condescending manner. I don't think that Davis took it that way either, from my understanding, from our reporting. But what was important about that moment is Arthur Blank actually was deeply touched by that players' owners session. And I think comments that Davis made that said, look, to the owners, you've got to listen to us. You cannot just, pay lip service to our issues. And that was a major concern in that room. I mean, one of the things that the owners heard from the players said, you can't behind closed doors and inside the locker room say you're empathetic to our causes and then publicly say nothing. Or like Jerry Jones say, if you take a knee, you're not going to play that Sunday. So that message, and Davis was really outspoken and very passionate. And I believe that Davis didn't take it from Blank that in a condescending manner. And I think it actually deeply touched Blank. We talked to him for the story, and he was giving high marks to all the players. Said it was one of the most important meetings he'd ever been to in his entire life. And I think because of Davis's passion, that message was delivered loud and clear to Arthur Blank.
I only bring it up because it shows a little bit of the nature of the relationship between owners and players, is that something happens outside of playing football, and these guys are borderline shocked to the point that they have to say something like that as if, number one, the two things are mutually exclusive, and number two, maybe somebody else hadn't told them that in their lives. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, I don't need you to tell me that I know how to talk in front of people and create a point that actually moves somebody. And the fact that Blank was moved to say that, again, I think it's a good thing overall, but it shed some light, like I said, on sort of how these guys interact with each other. You mentioned Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones is obviously sort of the fulcrum on an owner's level between a lot of these different things. Not only was he the one who took the knee in that game with against Arizona, with his team, but he's also the most powerful owner in the game. There's no questions about that. He's the most famous owner, and he's also the only owner that's a GM. I'm fairly certain on that level as well. So he is not just the richest guy on many levels. He is interacting with the game on a different level. His involvement was not what some people might have thought overall on the weekend in terms of the meetings he was in and where he was involved. Explain that to me.
Well, one of the most striking things is that owners-players meeting that the session began with. Jerry Jones wasn't there. He was not invited by Roger Goodell. Now, Jerry Jones is widely regarded as the most powerful owner. A lot of people call him the shadow commissioner. And for him not to be there, he was kept out purposely by Roger Goodell because he was worried that Jerry sucks all the oxygen out of the room when he's there. He's always selling. He's a salesman. And they were worried, Roger Goodell and other NFL executives, that it was going to become a referendum on Jerry's very public stance that if you take a knee, you're not going to play that day. So they excluded him from that session. But, of course, Jerry was not going to keep his mouth shut.
Right.
You knew that afternoon Jerry was going to get rolling, and he did. And he spoke up in the afternoon, although he was somewhat muted that first day, that Tuesday afternoon. But it wasn't until Wednesday with the owners where he basically said, look, all of the business metrics are going south. Television ratings are down. Merchandise sales are down. Every single way you can measure the popularity of the NFL, all the polls are quite alarming. They're all going in the wrong direction because this issue is resonating across America, across much of America. And Jerry was so concerned about that, he felt the owners should have voted on a mandate to require all the players to stand during the national anthem. But it never got any traction. So what's so interesting about what happened in New York in those 2 days is Jerry, who's used to winning, who engineered 3 franchises to move to 2 cities to glittering new stadiums and is always getting his way in these meetings, he didn't get his way. He took the L at these meetings.
Don Van Natta joins us. He wrote this story with Seth Wickersham. It's in ESPN, the magazine's November 13th edition. You're listening to The Right Time with Bomani Jones on ESPN Radio. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here on a Friday. Get instant gold status at Shell. Join the Fuel Rewards program now at fuelrewards.com/gold. You talked about things that didn't get out of the chute, and this is sort of a side detail, but I really want to know what your thoughts were about this. Anna Isaacson, Dawn Hudson. They had come up with a plan that was basically saying, look, we could concede something here and maybe for the greater good of everybody involved, take steps in that direction. Now, Anna Isaacson was brought on to this league a while ago because of her history working with domestic violence and some other things. And Dawn Hudson was otherwise already famous to come in as an image consultant for this league. For 2 women to sort of get railroaded out by a bunch of guys who basically said, we're not even getting close to conceding anything. This was only a small paragraph in your story, but it shed some light on sort of how aggressive the owners wanted to be about this. What did you think about their involvement in this entire situation?
Well, their involvement, they came up, as you said, with this 3-pronged action plan. The owners, when they heard it, they actually adopted it. They actually accepted it. But when the 2 women first put the proposal up at NFL headquarters, Roger Goodell, the NFL executives, they hated it.
So the execs, not the owners.
It wasn't the owners. It was the executives. Yeah, it was the executives who did not like it. And they just thought that it was too political, that it was going to incite President Trump for possibly saying more negative things about the league. They didn't think it really went very far. I mean, really all the 3-pronged plan does for your listeners is it basically says that the NFL is going to help the players with lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill and in state houses. Now, that's something that is of concern to them. It's fair. It's fair. It's also using the NFL platform the way it does on, breast cancer and other issues for this, which is also fair. But it also was attached to it a large request for a lot of money. For a lot of marketing money. And the throw the money at the problem idea got shot down right away by the business executives of the NFL and by Roger Goodell. Now, what's interesting about it, Clinton, is then a couple days later, Goodell gets behind the plan.
Right.
Basically because there's no other plan. So he embraced it, I believe, from our reporting because it was like they had no other ideas. I mean, look, this is a really difficult problem that they're wrestling with. You've got some fans that believe every single NFL player should stand every single time. Quite a few fans. And some of those fans have been turned off. You got other fans who say it's a constitutional right. The players have every right to protest. So it's a deeply polarizing issue. And I think that they've had a very difficult time getting their arms around it and figuring out a solution. And this was the action plan by default before the owners.
Oh, got a lot there. Don's going to come back for another segment. We're going to talk more about this.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Welcome back to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here on a Friday. All guests on The Right Time up here via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. With us now, we've got Don Van Natta of ESPN, the magazine. His story with Seth Wickersham we've been talking about. All right, Don, what level of psychological preparation from what you saw did the execs and the owners have going into this meeting, considering that this is a group of people who are rarely, if ever, on shaky ground?
Yeah, morale in the NFL office is extremely low. They're in a really tough bind, like you said. These billionaire owners are only used to every single metric for the NFL, from TV ratings, merchandise sales, valuations of franchises, to be going north, to be going up. And they're going down in large part because of this, since September 22nd, when Donald Trump made those remarks at that rally in Hicksville, Alabama. So these, relatively young, completely inexperienced executives, they have no experience in how to deal with a president attacking a brand and a business.
Who does
in this kind of profound way? And the billionaire owners who pay all these folks on Park Avenue, these executives, quite a bit of money, are demanding results. They're demanding ideas and results. So yes, the pressure was on. And like I said earlier, this action plan, Goodell and all of your bosses, when they first hear it, are like, that's all you could come up with? That's going to get us out of this mess, this crisis? And the fact that was eventually what was adapted by the owners also shows that the owners, for all of their expectations, really don't have many ideas about how to get out of this mess. I mean, it is an NFL right now in crisis over this issue, and they're just going to hope it's going to go away. They're just going to hope they're going to be able to ride it out.
Well, it's not going away, and we've got some breaking news here. Adam Schefter, ESPN NFL insider, is reporting. He said he's told DeAndre Hopkins' absence, that is for the Houston Texans, is related to Bob McNair's comments. First of all, inform the listeners what Bob McNair said, and secondarily, I would like to know, as much as you can say, what you think about this in terms of player-to-owner fallout in the NFL.
Well, Bob McNair, the owner of the Houston Texans, is one of President Trump's biggest supporters. He's a multi-million-dollar contributor to President Trump's 2016 campaign. He gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. He is somebody like Jerry Jones and Dan Snyder of the Redskins, who wanted a mandate for the players to stand. So he's one of the hardline owners. But in the discussions on Wednesday, this is not when the players were present. It was only when the owners were present at the Conrad Hotel. He said, we can't have the inmates running the prison. And that sentence deeply offended who I believe was maybe the only African-American in the room at that time. That's Troy Vincent, an executive vice president of the NFL, who later, after the owners spoke up and said, I can't believe you said that. I've been called all sorts of things during my playing days, including the N-word, right, and nobody has ever called me an inmate. And to be fair to McNair, he apologized to Troy Vincent. He did say, I'm sorry I said that. And then, of course, earlier today, when our story was posted on ESPN.com, Bob McNair put out a statement apologizing to the world.
Yeah.
And I take him at his word that it's sincere, but it's a deeply revealing comment in this context that an owner makes about how he sees the players. It's also a weird mixed metaphor, too.
Right. It's an intellectual botch on a couple levels.
Right.
But did any owners in your reporting indicate that they thought they might see some personal fallout like this? If DeAndre Hopkins is sitting out practices, what's to say that another team or even, I don't know, a position group might do the same for another squad and say, hey, I read your story, Don. I read what was written there. I didn't particularly enjoy what our owner had to say. I might have to take a couple of days off. Did any of the owners or any of the execs indicate that threat and something that thought might happen?
No, not a word. Not a word about that. I mean, the way it was described to us by people who heard it, and Seth and I had multiple sources for this, he said it, people cringed. I mean, people were aware enough among those owners this wasn't a good thing, but nobody spoke up from what I understand about it in real time. The commissioner didn't say anything about it. And it wasn't until later that Troy Vincent took it upon himself to come after McNair in the way he did, and he was quite passionate about that later on, after the fact, Bob McNair came up to Troy Vincent and apologized.
Last thing I'll ask you, Don, and this is important because let's not forget why we were here. Colin Kaepernick decided to sit for the national anthem in a preseason game. He decided to take a knee in a regular season game because he wanted to make a statement about police brutality in this country and the treatment of folks of color. On a basic level, did the actual concerns of one Colin Kaepernick come up without being asked from anybody involved here in your reporting of this story?
Yes, it did. It did. And the players were quite passionate about that. They do not like the fact that their message on this got obscured by the political frenzy of the Donald Trump attacks on September 22nd and all of the tweets that the president followed up, the anti-NFL tweets that he followed up that attack with over the course of the next week or two. Mm-hmm. They feel that calling it an anthem protest, in quotes, I think we have a line in our story about that, is wrong. It's not a single player will tell you that they're protesting the national anthem or the flag or the military. They're protesting, racial inequality. They're protesting the failure of the criminal justice system for African Americans and for all Americans. Yeah. They'll say, and they express that, Clinton, quite clearly in the players' owners session, and I think that was a good thing that they did, and certainly a lot of owners. Look, I think the fact that the mandate to stand that Jerry Jones desperately wanted going to New York never even got discussed in a real way on Wednesday was in large part because of the sincerity of those players in that message in that 3.5-hour session on Tuesday with the owners. I think the owners that were there heard it and came away. And look, also practically speaking, from a business standpoint, if you force the players to stand, a lot of them are going to react just the way Donald Trump did after week 2. On week 3, what was it? Several hundred players either stayed in the locker room, took a knee, raised a fist, whichever way they chose to protest. A lot of it was a protest of what Trump had said about them. But I think the owners were smart enough to reject that. But I think in large part why they did is because they are really sincere about moving forward with the players in a partnership, trying to come up with. Some owners literally said to the players, tell us what we can do. Yeah. What can we do? Martha Ford, the owner of the Detroit Lions, she's writing checks for, work that's going to be done in Detroit. And I think we're going to see Michael Bidwill in Arizona do that. And some other owners are willing to put their money where their mouth is to help the players with these causes to try to get real change. But that's a long, slow, expensive process. And the question is, how much patience do fans have while this goes on if protests continue?
I think it might be more than the owners realize. We're going to end this on a little game I like to call one-word answer. You have to play by the rules. Do you think Colin Kaepernick will ever play again in the NFL?
No.
He's Don Van Natta. He knows how to play the game. His story with Seth Wickersham is called Gaff's TV Ratings Concerns Dominate as NFL Players Forge Anthem Peace. It's in the November 13th edition of ESPN The Magazine. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Fantasy sports just got a lot easier to play and win with the hottest new games by Dober.Games. No more long lineups or complicated salary caps. Create at least 3 matchups and you're good to go. Make any combination of matchups you want. Play all quarterbacks this week, receivers next week. Even make picks across multiple sports. Just pick 3 matchups to win cash prizes. Dober.Games is one of the fastest, easiest ways to play daily fantasy sports. That's DOBER.Games. Dober.Games. Use promo code SPORTS to enter a free contest with cash prizes just for joining. You can win cash fast, easy at Dober.Games. Sign up right now at Dober.Games. Use promo code SPORTS to enter a free contest with cash prizes just for joining. Void where prohibited. See site for restrictions. Must be of legal age in your state or area. Fantasy sports just got a whole lot easier to play. Play big, win bigger at Dober.Games.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Welcome back to The Right Time with Bomani Jones, kiddos. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here on a Friday. ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance, and all guests on The Right Time appear via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so. There's 2 ways. 1-888-SAY-ESPN, 1-888-729-3776, or you can get at me on the 1-800-Flowers Twitter feed. Quick disclaimer in case you're new to the program. If you come incorrect in my mentions, I will embarrass you in front of your friends and your family, and I will not apologize. That goes for the phone lines as well. Since y'all are very fired up about the situation concerning Houston Texans owner Bob McNair, who said we can't have the inmates running the prison in regards to the circumstance related to the national anthem and NFL players, we're going to get on that again. Y'all apparently are very upset about this, and I understand why. There was a great story in ESPN, the magazine, that's coming out. We talked about this earlier in the show, about what happened when the players met with the owners. Some of y'all seem to believe that the fact that the 10 players who on the Texans who walked out of practice today, one of which did not return, who happens to be the best player on the team, DeAndre Hopkins, some of y'all seem to believe that this is somebody else's fault other than the owner of the teams. Some of y'all seem to want to believe that if he'd said something different, then things would have gone differently. Of course they would have gone differently, but he didn't say something differently. 1-888-SAY-ESPN, 1-888-729-3776. David in Indiana, what's up? David, are you there?
Yeah.
You're on the air.
I wanted to bring up that there's a deeper problem at play, and I think it has to do with the choice of using a cliche. It just speaks to a deeper problem in our society that somebody in that position would say something like that. They would need to choose better language in trying to get their point across, and it just speaks to the separation between the owners and the players in the way that somebody would use that kind of language.
Thanks for the phone call. That's a decent point. The flippant manner within which he said that was bothersome, but I think that the Freudian element there is an important one. You know? Understand my point here. 1-888-SAY-ESPN, 1-888-729-3776. Ray in New York, what's up?
Yo, what's going on, man? I just want to make a quick point. I'm in the military, right? So basically, you have to understand, like, as far as people taking the knee, you have to respect the freedom of speech regardless, because we fight for the right to have that right. That's what doesn't make us a fascist country. Secondly, the thing with the NFL, the owners are basically in a double-edged sword because they don't have standards. They didn't have standards before on what the players could and couldn't say in the military. You can't speak against the government or anybody. You basically have to stay neutral. If they would have had a rule prior to that, then I could understand because they're up or trying to change things or whatever the case may be. But you have to respect and work within the rules that you have. And them using their platform is well within their rights, unless otherwise indicated in the contract prior to joining the NFL. It's a tough situation, but people have to respect people's rights in the forefront to say what they got to say and do it peacefully. You don't have to agree. That's what makes us the United States, the ability to express ourselves properly.
Thanks for the phone call. That was a good phone call. Not a great phone quality, but what can you do? He made a good point. This is what it comes down to, folks. The whole point is that you should be able to say and do as you like. And yes, Bob McNair can say and do as he likes. But guess what? The result might be that your employers might walk out on you. That's what it is. It's unfortunate, but it's real. You're listening to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here on a Friday. We're going to take a hard right turn right now, and we're going to go to something I like to call baseball. Wanted to get those calls out of the way, but obviously there's a World Series game tonight. Game 3 is happening in Houston. Pivotal matchup in this series, to say the least. And Game 2 was an awkward one. I say it was awkward because some people believe that Dodgers manager Dave Roberts overmanaged. Now, look, it was a classic matchup. Don't get that twisted. And we're going to talk to Aaron Boone later in the program about this. Hopefully another guest as well. But Jessica Mendoza, excuse me. And I just wasn't sure if we were going to get that. We did. Thank you, Shannon. But there were some things that happened here that made this game a little bit dicey. Dave Roberts pulled Rich Hill in the 4th. Now, I understand that Dave Roberts wants to press a lot of buttons, and that Dodgers bullpen hadn't given up a run in God knows how long. But I think he shortchanged himself in this scenario. Rich Hill was looking good. Rich Hill had struck out Jose Altuve not once, but twice. And he didn't just strike him out by beating him on some nonsense. He corkscrewed him. the second time. And he made him look foolish the first time. Altuve was off balance. And I understand that he didn't look great otherwise. But if the guy who's the best hitter on the team isn't even getting after your guy on the mound who you started, you got to consider leaving him in. Look, I understand that teams get to Rich Hill on their third time around. But what happened when the next guy came in against Altuve? Oh, guess what? He hit a homer. I mean, so at that point, you've got to wonder whether or not that was the right decision. Now, everything he did after that, I didn't necessarily hate. You got to understand the Dodgers caught a break with that ball that hit off Chris Taylor's the bill of his cap and went straight to Jock Peterson. That could have been way more runs. They caught a break there. Also, I believe it was in the eighth, Shannon, when that ball got sliced to right and Puig didn't catch it, hit his glove. So the reliever he had just brought in ends up having to come out, whereas, because that ended up being a ground rule double. Whereas if he makes that out, that sets things up a little differently for the rest of the bullpen. So I didn't have a problem after basically anything Dave Roberts did outside of pulling Rich Hill. But pulling Rich Hill was an issue. Did you think Dave Roberts overmanaged him?
A little bit, yeah. Of course, revisionist history is what it is, but I think he did try to overmanage just a bit. You know, you go out there and let your guy, especially like to your point, if your guy's dealing, he struck out Altuve twice, you keep him in. Let him do his thing.
Who else is he there to get? He can't get out. I mean, you know, it's one thing if Altuve's going crazy on him. He's not.
Now, my question to you in regards to Roberts, does he change his approach now going into tonight's game 3? Because you think about their bullpen, the Dodgers bullpen, you would think one of the best in baseball. They get touched up here in game 2. So do you change that? Do you let your starters last longer, maybe a third time through the rotation here?
My issue with that, first of all, no, I don't change my approach. But what I do change is how quickly I'm pumping the accelerator. They were on their last available pitcher by the time they got to the 11th. Like, what if that game gets tied and keeps going? What do you do then? Then you were literally out of gas, running on fumes. So that wasn't particularly smart to me. But I don't think that the approach is the issue. I think the execution was the main problem. Let's hear about how he's managed that bullpen in the postseason. This is Dave Roberts, Dodgers manager.
You're going to have to lean on everyone, but extending your pen to an extreme amount right now in Game 2 or Game 1, understand you still have to win 4 games in a 7-game series. You still have to be very careful of that. With the way that things have gone for us in the postseason, we've allowed for rest because of games in between series or days in between series. I think that it's the balancing of the part of the lineup, what you have available, and make a decision. So that's something that I got to weigh. I got to manage kind of every game.
I feel like Dave Roberts is trying to do too much. You don't have to use every guy. You don't have to press every button. This feels a little bit like, I know this is sort of a weird comparison, but you remember the Pete Carroll situation where he decided he wants to throw on the goal line instead of hand it to Marshawn Lynch because he wanted to outsmart everybody. Show everybody that he could do that. Ends up losing in the Super Bowl. I'm not saying it's the same by any measure, but it is not dissimilar in the context of sometimes coaches want to prove and managers want to prove they're the smartest guy in the room instead of just trying to win the game in the best way possible. I don't think Dave Roberts does this a lot. I think he did this in Game 2. I don't think he'll do it again. But I don't like what he said before. He basically tried to say, well, if I got to press my buttons, I got to press my buttons. Well, that's the difference. You don't actually have to press the buttons just because they're on the toy.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Welcome back to The Right Time with Bomani Jones. My name is Clinton Yates, filling in here on a Friday. ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Progressive is celebrating 5 years and more than 500 cars donated to vets. To learn more, visit keystoprogress.com. Joining us right now on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line is Jessica Mendoza, ESPN MLB analyst. Jessica, I got to say, there's been a lot of talk about what Dodgers manager Dave Roberts chose to do. And I don't think he made many mistakes except for the first one when he pulled Rich Hill to begin with. He had Altuve on skates, K'd him twice. After that, it made sense, but I think the first move was the domino effect that messed everything up as far as the bullpen was concerned.
You know, I when he first did it, I knew why he did it, and this is part of what is kind of the future and where we're at in the baseball era right now as far as the analytics. I mean, it was clear that they had a conversation that when Rich Hill got to the third time through the lineup that Kenta Maeda was going to face those top three dogs, the big righties, George Springer, Jose Altuve, and Carlos Correa. And it just felt like, and it was obvious, that no matter how well Rich Hill was throwing, because I felt like he had come off his best inning. He struggled that first inning. I felt like he got better and better. You could see the frustration on his face. And obviously, to have hindsight, it was the wrong decision. But this is where the analytics, it was set up. It was set up beforehand. Rich Hill could have been anything short of a no-hitter, and he was coming out in that situation.
There's an argument with me, though, that at that point, if it's going to be that predictable, then it might not necessarily be the right move, not just from a hindsight standpoint, but from a hitter standpoint. If you're saying, I know this guy's coming out third time around, I can gear up for whatever it's going to be. Sure, Maeda's got good stuff, but as a hitter, how do you approach that knowing what you're going to deal with in that third AB?
I mean, it always helps to see a guy less. I mean, I would say it helps you as a hitter if you see him more. So, like, it'll help Rich Hill and the Dodgers if he only goes through two times through the order. The analytics of it make total sense if it works, right? Which is on paper what it says it will. So if you only go two times through an order, and as a hitter, I know, okay, I only got two times to see this guy, that's not a good thing either, because then you know you're going to press, you know they're going to look for things instead of kind of taking your time to get into that game. I just feel like the biggest thing is, and you're right, there's a field component. We can't just sit here, and the beautiful part about baseball is that the analytics, yes, are a huge part of it, but at the end of the day, you got to go out and beat those guys. Like, how do I beat them? And the feel for that is what happens at a World Series game, and that's when I credit a manager, is when he has to make a difficult decision and maybe go against what on paper says is the right thing to do.
Jessica Mendoza.
And ironically, Clinton, sorry to interrupt, is that Rich Hill is the best pitcher in baseball the third time through the order than anybody else. So that is something that even on paper said that he probably should have stayed in.
Jessica Mendoza, ESPN MLB analyst, joins us talking about the World Series. Game 3 is tonight. Coverage on ESPN Radio begins at 7 p.m. I had something that I really, really loved in this game, which was Puig's not bat flip, but the bat place down, in which he very gently set that bad boy right there on the baseline. He then commented later on what happened, regarding the other bat flip. What did you think about that whole thing and how that sort of culturally has come to a head as a discussion, what guys do when they hit big shots?
I love it. I mean, I love Correa just chucking his and looking at his team. And that's, the thing is, even if he had looked at the pitcher and done it, I'm okay with that too, because I'm okay with what you want to do in the biggest moment. Like that's right then and there. That was Carlos Correa's probably biggest home run of his life.
Absolutely.
Because it happened in the World Series, something he's never played in. And that's what you react to. That's you. You stick out your tongue. You do. I don't care. And if you're the guy like Puig who wants to just, you know what? I'm this cool that I'm going to just put it down. That's called personality. And guess what? Baseball needs it. And I love it. And if you disagree with it, I love that too. Because it makes you talk about it the next day. It makes you think about what you would have done. The point is not everyone's the same. And they're not robots. They're people. And this is how they react.
The series moves back to Houston. I said on a television set last week, and I almost got laughed out of the studio, that Houston might not have been ready for the bright lights of New York. They didn't win a game there, but they did manage to get this one, at least the last one in L.A. As a result, do you think that momentum has that grandly shifted to their side going back home for Game 3?
I think the Dodgers still get one in this series. I mean, there's a lot of and I'm not saying that they'll get Game 3, although I feel like this is a good chance because of Yu Darvish and his experience against the Astros. But I agree with the fact that the Astros, the way they play at home, it's not just a fluke. And talking to them, I was around them, they're on the batting cage in L.A., and this is like before Game 2, so they've just lost a game. And they're talking about how much they can't wait to get back to Houston. And not because they didn't like L.A. or they weren't looking forward to Game 2. They know. They know how well they play. And even if, it's all just chance or whatever, the fact that they feel better when they play in Houston and feel like they're better when they're in Houston, I say they at least take 2 or 3.
Wow. All right, let's switch gears out of the World Series. A couple side baseball managerial
Are you a
questions.
Dodger fan? Because
No,
like
I'm a Nats fan. I'm just, I just
sounded sad.
I'm sad. No, I'm not sad whatsoever. I'm sad about what I'm going to ask you about next, or at least the question after this. Number one, what do you think about the situation in New York regarding Joe Girardi? I felt like, look, it's time to move on. It doesn't shock me that much. He was the warhorse. They've got a new generation. They want somebody new. That didn't surprise me that much. What do you think about that decision?
It's where we're at now. I mean, you're a Nats fan, okay? So the Dusty Baker thing, I don't know where you stand with him either, but you've got 3 teams that made the postseason in the Red Sox, the Nationals, and the Yankees that all fired their managers. I mean, we're in a different day and age. And I just feel like where the game is headed, where it's at now, but not for every ball club, and is that the managers don't run the team anymore. They manage on the field play, but the front office has so much more power than it's ever had. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that what they're looking for is someone that they can be more controllable, someone that they can say, this is what the numbers are saying, someone that can say, pull Rich Hill before he gets third time through the order, and they'll do it. And again, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, whatever, but this is where we're at as far as the teams that are in this World Series. They do that. They don't completely control their managers. Their managers have a lot of say. They're very smart. They're incredible managers, but they're also very much a part of what the front office wants to do. And I just felt like Brian Cashman and Joe Girardi were not quite on the same page, and that's just not okay, I feel like, now to get to that next level. But it's still hard to swallow when you think about how well the Yankees did this year. Yeah, I still have the words, let's do it for Joe, coming out of Todd Frazier's mouth, right. Before that game 6 or 7. And it is hard, I think. It wasn't surprising, but it's just hard to think you can be that successful now and it's still not good enough. Like, don't sign me. I would not want to be a manager in baseball right now, because even if you do the job well, sometimes you still get canned.
All right, last question, Jessica. And my thoughts about Dusty are that I actually didn't have a huge problem with it. It wasn't surprising to me at all, considering he was out of a contract. I didn't think they were going to throw him out on a deal, but considering he wasn't it was gone, it didn't shock me. But my question is this. I see you on the crawl. John Farrell is interviewing with the Nationals. Last thing, do you think he'd be a good fit?
John Farrell for the Nationals?
Yeah.
No.
Fair enough. I don't either. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get into like every single what would be the best fit. I really believe Mike Rizzo needs someone. Again, it's about the linkage between that office and what they can do. And I don't think there was a rift between Rizzo and Dusty. No. I just felt like Dusty wasn't the guy, and I don't think John Farrell is either. All
right, she's Jessica Mendoza. She's an ESPN MLB analyst. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, anytime.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
So an interesting story popped up about the San Francisco 49ers. Now, we talked earlier in the program about their owner, York, and how he's actually rather woke when it comes to the matters of off-the-field stuff, or rather national anthem stuff. But this is a little bit of a different tale. Headline, San Francisco 49ers send out survey asking fans if they prefer the team win. Now, the options for this answer are, well, here, let me actually stand by. Let me give you the exact phrasing of the question. In regards to your overall game day satisfaction, how important is it to you that your team wins? Very important, important, moderately important, slightly important, or not important. Now, there's something about this that's sort of inherently funny to a certain type of fan. But I don't think that there's anything funny about this, and I actually think it's rather brilliant. Why? Because there's a whole lot more franchises out there that would like to admit that they want to know this from fans than actually are willing to ask. How do I know this? Well, number one, because I'm the type of fan, and it's not because I don't care or not die hard enough, but I'm the type of fan that if I'm actually at a game, winning and losing is secondary to whether or not I have a good time. Of course it helps, but it's also possible to have an awful time when your team wins. This is not unheard of. And here's the secondary part of this. I like sports. All right? I don't root simply because I think my team is going to win. That's not why I show up to the rink or the ballpark or the arena or the field. I'm not just there to bask in a victory. I'm there primarily to watch the sport being played, A. B, to have a good time with the people I know and I care about. And C, enjoy the communal value of the home team or my favorite team winning. Third on the list. And sometimes it's enjoyable if they lose because you just got to watch a good game, reverting back to the first thing. This isn't a crazy question at all from the San Francisco 49ers. And it is not remotely crazy at all to imply or to reply that it's not that important to you on a game day experience. The Niners are a franchise in America that once knew serious NFL glory. They managed to pull this off before and after free agency to some extent. That fan base now, these ain't your father's Niners. Where are they at, Shannon? Santa Clara? Wherever they are. They're not in San Francisco. They're in Santa Clara. They're entertaining a completely different type of fan. This is a reasonable, if not brilliant, as I stated earlier, method to try to figure out who their fan base is, Shannon, and what they can best do to serve them.
Not to mention, you said they're in Santa Clara, you got Silicon Valley, and if anything, the 49ers need to boast that we got the best Wi-Fi in the league.
You know what I'm saying?
It's the little thing. If that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do.
I mean, you come out, you tell me you got the best Wi-Fi in the league, your boy might show up. I got to get these grams off. I got to get these tweets moving.
But that goes back to your point about game day experience, though. Like most people now, we're on our phones. Like you said, you're more involved in the game and immersed in the game. But most people during the games, they're there on their phones. They're tweeting or sending pictures or sending Instagrams or selfies, being at the game, Snapchat videos while at the games.
Exactly. It matters. 49ers are sorry as a mug. Anybody worried about them playing nothing? Not remotely. And let me tell you all this. You know how I know this isn't ridiculous? One day, 5 years ago, I was in Ted Leonsis' office. He owns the Mystics, the Capitals, and the Wizards. I said, is winning the Stanley Cup your most important priority? He looked me straight in the face, and he said, my priority is having a team that competes every year and has a chance to win a title. He owns 3 teams. I'm just saying.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
All right. Most of y'all know that I live in Washington, D.C. Most of y'all know that I work in Washington, D.C. And all of y'all know that I root for the teams that play in Washington, D.C. The coach of the Washington Wizards is a man named Scott Brooks. The Washington Wizards played the Los Angeles Lakers 2 days ago. And as a result of what one LeVar Ball said about the team, one John Wall, who, by the way, I hear is the best shot-blocking point guard of all time, whatever that means, decided he wanted to pop off and say that basically he was going to make Lonzo Ball somewhat of a living hell. Another player on the Wizards, one Marcin Gortat, said that he was going to torture him. Wall is Ball. None of that happened. And the Wizards lost in overtime. Now, why do I bring all that up? To insert the news peg as to why Scott Brooks was asked about the way LeVar parents his son Lonzo, whom, by the by, was the number 2 overall pick in the NBA draft, in case you forgot that. Brooks said, quote, you know what? Hey, people talk about Lonzo's dad all the time. Hey, I mean, my father left me at 2. I would love to have my father around, like LeVar is around, and talk to him and pump me up with confidence. To me, that's every son's dream, and for some reason he gets criticized. No question, he's a little ambitious at times with what he says, but he's around his son. I have no problem with that, and maybe he could temper it a little bit, but I would have loved to have my father do that. Thank you! There are people who have been saying this from the jump. Just because you have a problem with LeVar Ball doesn't mean that he is inherently problematic. And number 2, look inside yourself and think about why you have a problem with LeVar Ball. Is it because you were automatically offended by loud screaming black men? Perhaps. Some of y'all are in my mention, so I know that that's part of your makeup. Or is it because you didn't like the fact that he's trying to sell you a luxury good and you're not used to brothers doing that, who aren't rappers or other entertainers? Or what else is it possibly that makes you not like LeVar Ball? Because it certainly isn't his ability to parent. I got a lot of problems with the way he treated those women referees. That's a big issue. Huge issue. But it ain't got nothing to do with parenting his kids in that specific regard. They are not disconnected. But that dude is around. And Scott Brooks, thank you for justifying something as a white dude in the NBA that a lot of black folks in and around the NBA and the media have been saying for months. For months. You don't believe me? Why don't you take a listen to Jalen Rose in March?
Father growing up. I never met him. He's the number one pick in the 1967 NBA draft. And you know what I would have loved for him to be doing? Exactly what LeVar Ball is doing. Yep. Let me say that again. You know what I would have loved for him to be doing? Exactly what LeVar Ball is doing. Riding for me. 110%. Making me shoot J's before dinner. Pushing me to be an all-time great. Telling me that Michael Jordan ain't nothing. You gonna be better than him. Telling me Steph Curry ain't nothing. You got this. I would have loved that because that was my personality anyway. Except I had to say it for myself. So instead of me taking the emotional energy to talk about how great I was and build myself up emotionally, then do it, if I had somebody else to do it, oh, man, I would have been a much better player.
Thank you. So just understand that what Scott Brooks is saying and justifying now is something that we've all been saying, and I thank Scott for saying this. Do not try to take this as me throwing shade at him. I'm not. This is just what we call in the business, air quotes here, Shannon, new research. New research shows that, black kids in school get punished harder than white kids for the same stuff. New research shows that they pull us over more when we're driving than they pull other people over. New research just means we've been telling y'all for years that y'all didn't believe us until somebody that looked like y'all told you. That's all I'm saying. Lonzo Ball is a respectful young man who is a tremendous basketball player because his father did his best to make him that way. It is not a separate matter. He is not simply trying to profit off his kids. People can't understand what happens when a black family takes agency over their own bodies for the sake of their own profit. If his coach was some dude in a gym in New Jersey who took him to practice and fed him meals every day, people would call that dude a messiah. Instead, because it's his dad who's willing to tell people how proud he is of him, people act like something's wrong with that because you're not used to seeing it. Understand what your issue with LeVar Ball is. He created something that he wanted to thrive from the ground up. He's a personal trainer. He doesn't even care about basketball. He taught his kids how to play. He taught the neighborhood how to train and play. The dude is doing everything he can to make sure that they understand ownership and self-worth. Can't be exploiting something if you built it fair and square. If you're telling me that Lonzo has a problem with his father, then I'll believe it when I hear him say it. But right now, Scotty Brooks, thank you so much for backing up what so many people in our community understand is the one decent thing that LeVar's done. If you're only going to count one. Homie is there. Up cooking them breakfasts. Up training them. Up letting them know what's important and what's not. Who cares what he's got to say to donks like me in the media? Who cares whether or not he's going to dance around with Stephen A. Smith on TV? You seen that kid play ball? You know any other parent that's got 3 kids going straight to UCLA? No. Gordon Gunn Krause had 3 kids that he wanted to go to the NFL and it worked. Might not have been as loud as LeVar Ball either. I'm not going to reference Joe Kennedy, but he said he wanted to make one of his kids the president of the United States of America, and he did it. If you're telling me that LeVar Ball can't roll out of the rack 20 years ago and tell the world he wants his kids to be in the NBA and all play for the same team, maybe you need to think about why that's such a hopeless dream for folks in America. Because it's not. And he's doing it. He's doing a pretty good job so far. whether or not you buy his shoes or not.
Thanks for listening to the Right Time Podcast. Please come back Monday for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.